Welcome to Mystifying Miracles. Glad to have you back. And today's story is a very interesting one. Not necessarily a medical mystery like our last video, but something a little different. And this one took place on an airplane that took place particularly on February 23rd, 1989. Shari Peterson was the woman of our story here today, and she was boarding a plane that day in 1989. She flew a lot. It was what she did for her job, so, she was used to these type things, in and out of airports around the country and whatnot. And on this particular day, she was getting ready to board a flight, and it was like the last leg of her. She had already taken all these flights for work and whatnot. So she was really looking forward to okay, this last flight here, and then I get a little bit of a break kind of a thing. So she was excited about that. The particular flight was leaving Honolulu, and it was flying over to Sydney, Australia on this day in 1989. It was late in the day, or really, I guess I should say early in the morning, because it was a 1 a.m. flight. And even though she had been tired from all the traveling and whatnot, and because it was late, she was still in a pretty good mood despite all things. I mean, after this last leg, this last trip for her work, she was going to get that much needed break. On this flight as well, her travel agent had actually got her upgraded, so she was very happy about that. So she was able to get a seat in business class. So she's boarding her plane with her bags, and a flight attendant is showing her the way to her seat, kind of pointing her over. Okay, there's your seat right over that way. So Shari makes her way over to the seat. As she approached the seat, 9F, F as in Frank, to be exact, was the actual seat in business class she was supposed to have. An older gentleman was sitting there, and, she politely told him, showed him her ticket. Look, this is 9F. I'm supposed to be in this seat. He refused to leave. He was adamant that he was staying put. He wasn't going anywhere. So, looks like Shari was going to be out of luck here. So she kind of looked over towards the flight attendant, and the flight attendant, is trying to help everybody board the plane. She has a lot of duties. So she basically tells Shari, well, look, sit anywhere you can find a seat you can have. We apologize. They didn't have time for all this because the flight was getting ready to take off. So they needed to find seats quickly. So Shari kind of moseyed her way onto seat 13F because it was empty, and she took a seat. And, she was kind of perturbed, as anybody would, because of the gentleman not moving out of her seat. But what are you going to do? So she sat down in 13F. So Shari's life, her personal life, was a little bit confusing, I guess you could say. She was in an abusive relationship and had been for a while. Her marriage just wasn't a happy one, and she was abused emotionally and verbally, and it just wasn't a good situation. And because of these things, Shari kind of let herself go, and she got addicted to pills and alcohol. So that's kind of just a little bit of a backstory about Shari Peterson's life. Now, when she sat down in seat 13F, she was just, again, exhausted, and she was actually looking forward to reaching down in her bag, taking some of the pills she had just to knock her out so she could get good sleep on the flight, and that way she could hopefully feel refreshed once they landed in Sydney. That was the story at this point in time. So Shari buckles her seatbelt, and she's getting ready to reach down for her bag with the medicine when all of a sudden something made her pause. And that something just happened to be a random thought that popped up in her head. And it was kind of like not the norm for Shari, these kind of thoughts to just pop up like this. So she was kind of like, the thought itself was, maybe you shouldn't take the pills, because what if there is an emergency? And so she kind of thought about that. She was like, why did that pop up in my head? That's random and weird and unlike me. She kind of went back and forth in her head like, well, planes are safe. The crew's going to take care of us. Why not? Why can't I have the pills? And then she'd think, but this thought popped up in my head. So maybe I shouldn't take the pills. And it came down to it. She was like, okay, I guess I won't take the pills. And so she decided against it, which was very also unlike Shari. So she buckles up, she decides whatever, and instead she pulls a book out of her bag, thinks, well, maybe if I read, that'll kind of relax me, tire me out, and I'll fall asleep anyway. So that was her plan. The plane's getting full and getting settled in. The pilot comes over the speaker, welcomes everybody, says that it should be a smooth flight and with no issues, tells them to sit tight, have a good night or day, I guess, really, and they'd be off on their way shortly. The plane takes off, and shortly after takeoff, Shari starts thinking, and she starts getting a little bit agitated again because she starts thinking about the gentleman not too far away that took her seat in business class, and she was just, having those perturbed thoughts like, how dare he? Kind of thing. She kind of reeled herself back in and was like, all right, back to this book. I need to just concentrate. That way it can relax me and I can go to sleep. So she does that and kind of stops those thoughts off. As soon as she has the book in her lap, she opens the cover and she hears a voice and whisper into her ear. And the voice said, tighten your seatbelt. You're in for the ride of your life. Obviously, she paused and was like, what in the world? She looks behind her and she's like, no one's there except for the flight attendant in the galley back behind her. So she was like, who was that? What was that? Why would a whispering voice whisper or tell her to tighten her seatbelt and it would be the ride of her life? So startled as anybody would be. And, as she's kind of still looking around, then, the hairs on the back of her neck start to stand up and, you get those little chills. That was what was happening to Shari. And so she's like, okay. She tightens her seatbelt anyway. I think I would do the same if I heard her voice telling me that. And not 1 minute later, there was a big explosion. And before you knew it, before Shari knew it, the whole right side of the plane was gone. It was just like this big pow all of a sudden. She kind of closes her eyes and she, everything's happening so fast and she's thinking, this can't be real. This can't be happening. When she opens her eyes, she kind of looks out and she sees the windows, and outside she remembers seeing the engines of the plane on fire. As this was going on, she's closing her eyes, she's looking out. Wind is blowing and slapping everything all around. Confusion, havoc, debris is flying everywhere. The plane lights actually go out. So this is nighttime or the wee hours of the morning, so it's still dark out. So it's just like you can't hardly see anything once the lights go out. And upon that blast, 8 people, and it said they were the people that were sitting in rows 9 through 12. When the explosion happened, unfortunately, the people in those rows flew out of the plane immediately. The blast just kind of sucked them out and threw them out. And that actually included the man sitting in seat 9F, the one that Shari was supposed to be sitting in. He was gone with all the rest of those people in those rows. Now, also worth mentioning at this point, it wasn't found out till later after the fact what caused the explosion, of course. What caused the explosion was a cargo door. It was like a latch that had malfunctioned. And so that led to the decompression of the plane and, structure failure. So that was found later on, of course. But yeah, so that's what happened and caused this to all occur. As all the confusion was going on, Shari remembers looking and seeing the flight attendant, the lady that had helped her in the beginning and that had been behind her. After the blast, she looked, and the woman, the flight attendant, was unconscious, and her body was kind of wedged into a small space under seats, and the seats had kind of flipped forward. So she was just kind of wedged in there at an odd angle. But she was conscious, actually. She wasn't unconscious. So Shari kind of looks back and is like, oh my goodness. Shari knew that one wrong move and it would be it. Like if those seats that were tipped forward, kind of almost holding the flight attendant in, is the way I pictured it. If they moved or flew off, that would probably be a bad thing for the flight attendant. So Shari kind of reached back as best she could to kind of put her hand on the flight attendant just to give her a little bit of comfort. And she began to pray. Shari began to pray immediately just for God to help them, to save them. And no sooner than she started praying and doing that, she says she saw a hand come down up out of the sky, place itself under the plane. And as she saw the hand come up under the plane, like this huge hand just coming out of the sky, immediate peace kind of came over Shari's body at that point in time. And of course, at the same time as that's going on, the prayer and the peace that Shari's feeling, the pilot by the name of David Cronin, his instincts took over immediately as all this was happening so fast. He began to dump fuel because he knew that would help minimize any other fires or explosions. Didn't want the plane to be full of fuel and that cause other issues. And he was able to turn the aircraft around and set a course back to Honolulu because they weren't that far as this had happened, almost right after takeoff. The book that I read this out of, and I'll post it in the link or in the description box, it said that David was able to keep the plane higher than the gradual glide that would normally be used because he knew that he wouldn't be able to regain any lost altitude. So that's why he did that. And, of course, it didn't say that the pilot noticed or was praying or saw the hand like Shari did as either. So that was Shari's experience. Shari was just overjoyed when she began to see the lights come into view down below in Honolulu. She knew that peace that was still there. She was like, okay, we are going to be all right. The little story also said that Shari was just in awe as well because she knew, why didn't this plane break apart? Those thoughts of, this should have broke apart. We shouldn't have made it. But also the thoughts of, well, I prayed and I saw the hand come out of the sky and kind of glide up under the plane to help us. So, it's back and forth. You don't know what to think. I can only imagine, the thoughts and that feeling of awe going through her mind. And, as they neared the Honolulu airport, the brakes and the landing gear held up, worked just fine, and they were able to land safely. So all in all, 14 minutes after the actual explosion, they were safely back in Honolulu. It also, is interesting to note that it said investigators, they were never able to land a 747 with that same amount of damage as this plane had and, have it be okay. They were never able to do that. And I guess, through flight simulations or, I'm not sure how that works, but they were in awe and confused, the plane should have broke apart. So it's pretty interesting. They were perplexed. They kept trying and trying, well, maybe... Nope. Every scenario they tried with the same amount of damage that the actual plane had failed and broke apart and did not hold up. So they were very confused. But dare I say, a miracle? That's what I say it was. Shari, she knew that it was a divine presence, it was God that saved them. After all this experience, she began to view her life differently and kind of change things up. A quote that Shari said after the fact was, Why don't the stories we read about in the Bible ever seem to happen today? It bothered me. Now I know miracles do happen." End quote. And as of 2019, Shari has written her own book detailing her experience of that particular day in 1989. The book, it's called The View from 13F. And I'll also post that down in the description box as well for those who are interested. But another very cool story, as I always say, even though I read these beforehand and all that, going through it when I'm actually doing these recordings, I get excited about it all over again. It just it amazes me, and I'm like, that is so cool. So I don't know, something different. I had never heard of this story, and I'm an 80s baby, so I don't remember this particular incident, so I thought it was cool learning about it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like and subscribe if you did, and I will see you guys for the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.